Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The moon has been sighted for the new year, and tonight is the eve of the first of Muharram, 1446 after the Hijri. Allah has blessed us with one more opportunity to offer our condolences to the Prophet Muhammad and his Ahlul Bayt. May peace and blessings of Allah be upon them all. Salawat. Muhammad. There will be a series of 10 majalis that will reach its climax on the day of Ashura, which will be on Tuesday, July 16th. Every evening, we will start the program with Salatul Maghribain. This will be followed by the majalis. The Urdu Majlis will be taking place upstairs, and the English Majlis will be taking place down here. Of course, all of you know this because you're down here. But for those who will be coming on later days, or for those of your family and friends who will be coming, you can let them know that this will be the program. The program downstairs will begin with the recitation of the Noble Quran. This will be followed by English poetry, and the majalis will be addressed by our scholar, Sayyid Sulayman Hasan Abidi. And the program downstairs concludes with Majlis, and then we all head upstairs to join the Urdu program for Matam. Before we begin tonight's program, just a couple of important community announcements. Number one, there will be a weekly ladies Majlis-e-Azza. Majlis that will take place every Saturday beginning at 11 a.m. The first Majlis will be on the 13th of July, so next Saturday. And the program begins at 11 a.m. and the Majlis will be addressed in English by Khanum Maryam Ali Tahir. The Mehdi Youth Group will be hosting a discussion with Sayyid Sulayman Hasan Abidi on Saturday, July 13th, after the conclusion of the program. This is a brothers event for the youth age 14 and above. Now for some of the more important announcements pertaining to the programs here at the masjid. We have designated rooms for mothers with children as well as fathers with children. Management at Bayt al-Ilm humbly requests that parents with children under the age of 7 use these designated rooms to ensure the Majlis environment is respected, and then join us for Matam in the Majlis at the conclusion of the speech. For the ladies, the rooms for them and their children are upstairs in the multi-purpose room. That will be for Urdu. For English, it will be in classroom number 11. For the men, they're requested to take their children who are age 7 and under and be with them in downstairs classrooms, in classroom 6 for English, and for Urdu in classroom 8. Once again, this is for parents who have children under 7. The management at Bayt al-Ilm humbly requests that you and your children attend the Majlis in these rooms rather than in the main hall. Food is not allowed in the masjid. Please refrain from eating or drinking anything during the Majlis. And when you're in the parking lot, please drive carefully. We have a lot of people coming in for the majalis. There are children, there are elderly who are walking slowly. Please, please, please drive very carefully, be very careful. It's dark outside and we don't want any accidents. For the ladies, the tabarruk after the program will be distributed near the elevators. So what will end up happening is that the men will be exiting through the main entrance, and then the ladies will be exiting through the exit by the elevators. That's the blue door there, and that's where the tabarruk will be distributed. So keep that in mind. So with that, let us begin the program. Please welcome our young brother Muhammad Hussein for the recitation of the Noble Quran with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك سوط عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي يهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم.
MashaAllah, beautiful recitation by Brother Muhammad Hussein for him, for his family, for his teachers, for their health, safety, and continued blessings. Please recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Hussein and his companion, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma.
Oh, you can sit in the middle, brother. Okay? Sorry.
All right. Again, I would like to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us for another year of mourning. And if we could keep this setting for the mic, I think the echo might be too much. I'm okay with this setting. For mourning, honoring, and being reminded of one of the many great martyrs, Imam Hussein and his companion, alayhi salatu wassalam. For those who were here for yesterday's khutbah, we can remember our dear Maulana Faizi mentioning the importance of azadari, that compassion we have for our fallen truly help us preserve such an honorable event. The reason why we are here today and across the country and the world shedding our tears for the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I will be dedicating this first poem to the Imam and his companions in an entirety who were with him till the very end. And I call it The Humble Caravan. Please recite salawat. Humble caravan, travel through the sands, heroes of Islam. You are in our hearts, honor and sacrifice, martyred a grand prize, evil cornered you, yet could not shroud the light. No fear while they fought, they did not back down. Fourthly, following their Lord, protecting Islam. Humble caravan, who showed selfless acts, heroes of Islam. You lie in our hearts, our azadari brought, our community. From their ashes came a phoenix from the grave. No one stopped Hussein. All this was ordained 100 years, and we still cry his name. Humble caravan, led by our Hussein, heroes of Islam, remember their names. Salawat. To think that it took 20 years in my life to first learn about the tragedy of Imam Hussein. Yesterday there was a post from Sheikh Rastani that I came across where he says, "It is a blessing from Allah that you even know about Hussein and his story, and many don't. Imagine what life would be like without knowing the story of a man who stood against thousands on the 10th of Muharram." And I've honestly wondered that myself, and thankfully it was honestly very hard to imagine that. Personally, I did not want to, for I am so thankful for knowing the history and still learning. Sadly, what I have wondered is, what would I have done? What would I have done if I was there? What would I have said if I had the opportunity to speak to the thousands of soldiers that surrounded the family of the Prophet? And I would at least try to have them consider. And that is the name of my next piece. Consider. Please recite salawat. Have you considered? Have you put thought to it? From whom you will betray? If he were here, if he would see you now, Rasulullah would stop and think how can you betray your own soul, your own deed? How dare you slay my love, my family? Do you not care they are all so young? Will you truly dare take their heads and have them hung? Did you not stop? Did you not stop and think to give them food or anything to drink? While my Hussein, while he did it for free, you brought him pain, don't you know? Those who hurt him hurt me. How can you betray your own soul, your own deed? How dare you slay my love, my own family? Oh God, you know what is fair. You'll take them while they're young. They'll arrive in prayer, their memories will be sung. Salawat.
Beautiful recitation by Brother Musa. One thing I noticed is we have a lot of people in this hall, but I don't hear their voices when reciting salawat. Before I ask you to all recite the salawat, I'm going to relate to two hadith on the importance of reciting salawat. Our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family says, "Send blessings on me frequently, as it is the light which will light up your grave." Abundant salawat for us is a means to attain blessings in this world and beyond. Our 8th Imam states that whoever is seeking to have his sins forgiven should send blessings on the Prophet Muhammad and his family, as it destroys sins completely. With that in mind, let us recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before I invite Maulana to address us, I'd like to acknowledge tonight's sponsors. Tonight's sponsors are Brother Haider and Sister Zareen Shah, Brother Daman and Sister Alina Shah, Brother Sean and Sister Amber Shah, Brother John and Sister Amber Naqvi. They ask that you remember the marhumin of your families and that you remember the marhumin of their families. In particular, Sayyid Ali Raza Naqvi, Sayyida Hubbi Zahra Naqvi, Sayyid Imdad Hussain Shah, Sarwar Begum, Sayyid Askar Ali Shah, Sayyida Ijaz Fatima, Sayyid Khurshid Haider Shah, and Sayyida Iftikhar Banu. Please let us remember the marhumin of your family and the families and the members of the sponsoring families with a Surah Fatiha preceded by a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah. Our speaker for these next 10 nights is Sayyid Sulayman Hasan Abidi. Sayyid Sulayman Hasan Abidi was born and raised in Western New York, where he attended both school and college. And while he was in high school, he would attend classes in Arabic and fiqh at the Hawza Ilmiya in Medina, New York. After graduating from the University of Buffalo with a degree in business administration, he proceeded to the seminary in Qum, Iran. And that was in 1997. In Qum, Sayyid Sulayman specialized in fiqh and in history, and he returned home to the United States in 2007, where he became the religious director here at Beit al-Ilm, as well as the president of the Ahl al-Bayt Islamic Seminary. While he was here with us in Chicago, he was also in parallel pursuing his studies at the University of Chicago, where he graduated with a PhD in Near Eastern Studies. A loss for us, Sayyid Sulayman moved to the Washington, D.C. area in 2017 and currently serves as a resident scholar at Shahi Najaf in Alexandria, Virginia. He's a board member of the Mufid Academic Seminary in Fairfax, Virginia, and serves as the Deputy Secretary of the Council of Shia Muslim Scholars of North America. It is an honor and a privilege for our community to host him during these first 10 days of Muharram. Please stand up and welcome him to the minbar with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ميم أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فليعلمن الله الذين صدقوا وليعلمن الكاذبين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. Respected Sheikh, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you know, this is the eve of the month of Muharram. It is the beginning of a new year, but not a time of celebration. Rather, it is a time of contemplation and a time of grief and remembrance for us. And as Brother Musa said, it is a gift from Allah that we have that remembrance and that we have that grief. During these nights that we will be together, inshallah, we will try to understand the events of Karbala, the sacrifice and the mission of our Imam, Sayyid al-Shahada, Imam Hussein ibn Ali alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Not just as an event, but rather as a movement and as a call and as a foundation for the mission of the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi, may Allah hasten his reappearance. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And the fulfillment of God's promise to humanity that however dark the world around us may seem, and however hopeless the situation of humanity may appear to us, Allah has a purpose and He has a promise. And there is a triumph that will come to those who are righteous, to those who are pious, to those who are loyal to the message of our Prophet and the progeny of our Prophet. And so inshallah we will be looking at not just the events of Karbala as events that took place in history, but rather the events of Karbala as setting the foundation for the culmination of history and the fulfillment of God's purpose for humanity. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And this is rooted in our understanding of our existence in this world as a test and a trial, and not just a coincidence or a product of material circumstances, political forces, or other human decisions or events. Allah says in the opening verses of Surah Al-Ankabut, Alif Lam Mim, أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. Did people assume that they would be left saying, we are faithful, we have iman, we are believers, وهم لا يفتنون, without them being subjected to a trial and a test in their life? And if they had that supposition that, well, Islam is going to be victorious and Islam is going to be triumphant, then Allah says that we have tested those who came before them, and that divine practice will continue in our time and in our nation, and most assuredly Allah will get to know. And this فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا وَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ does not mean that Allah doesn't know and He is going to wait for the result of the test, and then He will find out, as we will find out, who was successful and who was not. Allah getting to know means that Allah will show and demonstrate for all who may be in doubt who it is that are true and honest and faithful, and who it is that are unfaithful and untrue and are lying when they say that they have accepted Allah as their Mawla and they have accepted the Prophet as their guide and as their role model, and they will follow his commandments and his teachings. That will only become known to us through the tests that Allah gives us in our lives. And the way that we can find out what the nature of those tests is and how it is that we can succeed in those tests is وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. Get to know what were the tests that Allah gave to those who came before us. Because those stories in the Quran and those stories that were taught to us by the Prophet and by Ahlul Bayt, and the stories that we have from the life of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they are not there just for us to have a history or to have information about the past. They are there for us to learn how we are to live our lives and to prepare for the challenges and the tests that we will also have to undergo. So inshallah, over the course of the coming nights, we will embark on a journey through not history, but through the purpose and through the divine wisdom that operates in history. And that is the way in which Karbala is a foundation and a preparation for the struggle and for the movement, and insha'Allah eventually for the triumph of the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So before we embark on that journey, one of the things that is very unique about the Muslim calendar is that the first month of the year is a month of grief and of mourning. Another thing that is unique is that this calendar begins not with the birth or with the death of our Prophet, but rather with the hijrah and the migration of our Prophet from Mecca to Medina and the establishment of that first Islamic society in the Prophet's city of migration, a city that we know of as Madinatun Nabi, but that was known at the time by its pre-Islamic name, Yathrib. When we look at Hijrah, we see a very auspicious beginning. And in fact, sometimes people say that this was the establishment of an Islamic society. This was the establishment of an Islamic government. This was the beginning of the Ummah in a way that was not possible for the Prophet to establish when he was in Mecca because of the oppression and the opposition of the polytheists, and in particular the aristocracy of Quraysh. But that is kind of the benefit of hindsight. And if you know one thing about human nature, it is that we always back project what we find out later, and sometimes to impress ourselves or others, and sometimes without even realizing it, we think that we knew what we know now earlier than we had any inkling of what we know. There's many people, and they have an investment that shoots up beyond all expectation. Different stocks, I don't know how Nvidia is doing now, apparently it had gone up beyond all expectation. Apple before that, when Bitcoin flies above its previous average, then you will always find people who say, you know what, I was considering buying it when it was low. And maybe they did think about it, maybe they did hear about it, but it was one of 30 other pieces of information that they had, and they may not have paused particularly at that piece of information. Maybe they're talking with a friend who is in the world of investment, and they mentioned something, and you heard it, and then you filed it away because who knows what's going to happen in the future, and you don't want to risk money that you might need on something that is unsure. But then a few months later or a few years later, when one of those stocks or one of those investments or one of those options or opportunities that you might have actually been presented with before does very well, then at that point, that will become much bigger in your memory. You might not remember that there were 4 other things on the table, and maybe those investments did not do as well. So if you had actually done what you were thinking about at the time, you may actually have been far behind. But because those things fell into oblivion, and this one investment or this one stock exploded in value, everybody remembers that one thing. Sometimes when a political party chooses a nominee, people will say, I remember from that first speech in this convention that this person has a very unique future. I knew it all along. Or I knew that this thing was going to implode and it wasn't going to get anywhere. When in reality, you didn't know it, you found out later, and then you remember, maybe without even realizing it, certain parts of that story that reinforce the fact that you were predicting or you had the ability to predict it. That's human nature. But there is a danger that if you don't question your own back projection of what you found out later in order to better remember what your state of mind and your level of information was at the time, you might not be able to make good decisions in the future, or you might not derive the right lessons from the experiences that you had in the past. Many of you will have studied logic, or you will have heard of survival bias and other mistakes that people make in their decision making. This is true of Islamic history as well. Many people, they see the outcome and they assume that this was always destined to be the case, and therefore it is a straight line from one period in time to another period in time. But it's very important for us to go back and to understand what were the actual circumstances. And that helps us answer the question, what were the factors that led to a particular outcome, success or failure? And it also helps us gain an understanding of where would we stand if we were present at that time. Let me give you a contemporary example before we come back to the migration of our Prophet Muhammad, salawatu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Today, we are witnessing a grievous crime of historical proportions in Palestine and in Gaza. Many of us, we are witnesses, and our prayers, our hearts are dedicated towards those who are oppressed and are suffering. And sometimes we may feel like we don't even know what to do and how we can act in a moral manner in these circumstances. But one change that many of you will have noticed among Muslims, and even among many non-Muslims and people of conscience, people who don't believe in God, Christians, people of the Jewish faith, many other people, is that they understand and they respect and they admire and they may be even inspired by the resistance. There was a narrative that came out soon after October 7th that this was an act of violence, it should be condemned, it was something that is unjustifiable, even if there are crimes or unjustifiable events on the other side as well. Many of you will remember the frustrating moments sometimes when you just want to get information from the news or from the media, and you have that narrative and that propaganda that you are subjected to, and that many people, even some Muslims, sometimes were not sure how to respond. But remember that no matter what people may wish to spread in propaganda or in falsehood, falsehood does not have staying power. And what is true, it will eventually supplant what is false. Dhu al Hijja wa zahaqa al batil. Truth has come and falsehood has been vanquished. Inna al batila kana zahuqa. And that's not because of a fluke or a one-off event. It is the nature of falsehood to be vanquished and to be defeated and to flee before the light and the strength and the reality of what is real and what is true. So now you will find many people, they understand that if you oppress a person, then there will be a response. And that response may not be pleasant, but it is not something that you should condemn. Instead, you should condemn that continuing crime that resulted in that response. Regardless of how you may evaluate or whether or not you may agree with that response, if there is condemnation, it isn't in the way that a victim responds to a crime. It is in the person who commits that crime in the first place. So now, because people have seen, they have studied, they have examined, so many people say that, yeah, I understand why somebody would resist. If I had been subjected to generation after generation of vicious oppression, denial of my very existence, denial of my most basic rights, denial of my human dignity, oppression, visited upon entire families and an entire society, then I understand why people will resist, not just through protests, but also through armed resistance. It is understandable, and this is not to say whether it is advisable or whether it is not advisable. It is to say that even people who until yesterday may have said, you know what, the Palestinians need a Gandhi, or they need to do this, or they need to commit to a particular strategy. Even those people now will say that maybe they have their own philosophy. In Islam, we have a belief that if you are oppressed, then you have a right to resist. And nobody can take that right away from you, because it is not given to you by a government or by a human being. It is given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is part of human nature and is part of the dignity and the rights that have been given to you by your Creator. But even those people who may not have that same religious belief in Allah and the rights or the duties that He has given us, they understand. And some people, they even will admit that there is no hope except through this resistance, through dignity and through courage and through sacrifice. Otherwise, the issue of the Palestinians, it may have been forgotten, as so many efforts were made in history. But the point is not what people see today. The point is that 1 year ago, probably the vast majority of people who see and say that I sympathize with the resistance, or maybe they don't sympathize and agree, but at least they see where it is coming from. They say, I can understand it, even if they're not yet willing to take that step and say, I fully support it. A year ago, would the majority of those people who today are supporting or are at least sympathetic have held the same view? It's a very important question, because it's very easy for us to be inspired. It's very easy for us to choose a path when the going becomes easy or when it's publicly known. But what is far more difficult is for us to see the seeds of an event that is in the distant future. But the true value does not come from those who do hijrah just before the conquest of Mecca. There were some people, the elevator door was closing, and just as it was about to close, they stuck their foot in and they said that we are muhajirin. Because by then, the victory of Islam, it was almost a foregone conclusion. They made it into the elevator, but just barely. And then, of course, the very possibility of becoming a muhajir, it was abolished after the conquest of Mecca. By then, even the most strong opponents of Islam, they nominally accepted Islam. Whether it was a matter of the heart or just a matter of the tongue, that is a question for scholars and for historians, and in the end it is a matter for Allah Azza wa Jalla to adjudicate. But la hijrata ba'd al-fath. After the conquest of Mecca, then there is no more migration. That is easy. After the conquest of Mecca, it was easier to be a Muslim than not. But even just before the conquest of Mecca, and we should say specifically after the victory over Khaybar and the opening of the northern border of Medina, and then the end of any possibility of a siege or a strangling of the Muslims, then it wasn't worth that much for people to accept Islam. Not as much as it was worth it for people to accept Islam earlier, when the going was hard. And so the question that we should ask ourselves is, did we sympathize with what is right early or late? When the going becomes clear and the truth becomes clear, then that is a blessing from Allah, because even if we were maybe confused about what is right, it gives us an opportunity to correct our own misconceptions. But then don't just say that now I am on the bandwagon. Let's go forward. Stop and think. And if you were not on that caravan before, then give yourself some opportunity to understand why you were not. Because you don't want it to be the case that there are seeds being planted today and you are ignoring them. And then 20 years later, or maybe 50 years later, or maybe 75 years later, if you are alive, or those places and people that you influenced are still alive, they will say, I wish we had known sooner. In some way and at some point you need to examine in order to be able to say that I want to be able to understand what is right, not when everybody knows, but rather when everybody is still unsure, or maybe is actively imposed. So we can be among those who are planting the seeds, and not just those who are harvesting the fruit. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That's clear today. There were people who sacrificed their well-being, even their lives, to support the rights of an oppressed people, and those sacrifices may have been decades ago. Maybe even some of their friends would have said, was it worth it? And maybe many people would have said that, you know what? We were lucky that we didn't fall into that effort. But the lucky ones are those who recognize early, even if they may pay a material or a worldly cost for their early recognition. And that is true in Islam as well. So the hijrah of the Prophet, for you and me, is the foundation and the beginning of that nation that became a very glorious civilization that spread like, they say like wildfire, but we should say like light illuminating a dark world from Medina to the corners of the earth in record time. And in reality, it had one hand tied behind its back, because although it was the message of the Quran and it was the religion brought by Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wa alih, but it was not being taught by those who truly understood and represented that religion. And so all of this glorious success of the message of the Prophet and the spread of Islam and the receptivity of new people towards the religion, it was in spite of the fact that one hand was tied behind the back of that body of Islam when it was being represented imperfectly and incompletely. But still, so great was the illumination of what the Prophet brought that it inspired multitudes of humanity. But on the eve of Hijrah, if you were an impartial observer, is that what you would have seen? Because it was just a small number of people from Aus and Khazraj who had accepted Islam. The majority of Aus and Khazraj, we know them as the Ansar. And in history today, when we mention people's affiliation, generally we say Al-Ansari. But that is not an actual tribal affiliation. That is a title of honor given to those who received the Prophet and the early Muslim migrants or refugees from Mecca. And because this was a name of honor, and Aus and Khazraj were just names of tribal affiliation, today we know Ansari as the main way to recognize people like Abu Sa'id al-Khudri or Sa'd ibn Hunayf or other people from the Ansar. But in their time, their affiliation was either with Aus or Khazraj. And these two tribes had a multi-generational war among themselves. In fact, that was one of the reasons why they were receptive for the Prophet to come, not necessarily as a divine messenger, but as a neutral person from a very illustrious and well-respected line, a descendant of Prophet Ibrahim and Ismail alayhim as-salam, who could maybe just mediate and adjudicate their disputes. But it was hostile territory, because there was another effort to achieve a little bit of political peace in Yathrib at that time. The figure that Muslim historians know as the head of the hypocrites, Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Abi Salul, he was the chief or a chief of Khazraj, and after back and forth and negotiations between Aus and Khazraj, it was almost agreed that he would be crowned a king in Medina. It was because of those political aspirations and that tribal prejudice that the people of Medina had that one nucleus of hypocrites formed, because they were jealous of and they were opposed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his establishment of a societal compact that was based not on a tribal union, but that was based on a principle of tawheed among the Muslims and justice among the Muslims and the non-Muslims. So on the eve of Hijrah, you have a minority of people in the city of migration who are Muslims. They come from two tribes that have had generations of war, and those battles could flare up at any moment. And in fact, during the lifetime of the Prophet in Medina, and even after the death of the Prophet in Saqifa, you see that there was still some heat left in that fire. It hadn't entirely been put out. It hadn't been entirely extinguished. Then among the Aus and Khazraj, there was a nucleus of people who were opposed to the Prophet on tribal and political grounds, and they had wealth, and they had numbers, and they had political organization among them. Then in Medina, you had various Jewish clans. Not only Banu Qaynuqa and Banu Nadir and Banu Qurayza, but other smaller clans as well. And in the environs of Medina, you had various small fortresses and villages And then you had the Bedouin tribes of Hijaz and Najd. And all of them were either directly opposed to Islam and to the Prophet, or they were allies or potential allies of Quraysh, who were the sworn enemies of the Prophet. So to the south, you had the power center of Mecca and Ta'if. And they were so opposed to the Prophet that it was their oppression that he had to flee. And in the north, you had Khaybar and Fadak and other settlements, and you had various tribes. So it was a minority within the city with powerful, wealthy factions that were opposed, and the potential for a complete siege of the Prophet and the Muslims within the city and outside of the city. And then imagine that you are, once again, an impartial observer. And you might say, well, this isn't the first hijrah. How many times are you going to flee? Your city is opposed to you, and so first you send one group to Abyssinia. There are different narrations. Some say that the first migration was 12 people, and then there was a second migration. Even more people had to flee, 70 some people. And they stayed in Abyssinia for years. The first migration, generally historians say that it was in the 5th year after the Prophet's appointment to his prophetic role. So about 8 years before the migration to Medina, one migration to Abyssinia, then a second migration. The date of the second migration is not known, but within 8 years, you have one migration to Medina, a small number. Then a second migration to Medina, a larger number. A boycott in Mecca that almost caused the eradication of Islam. But it was protected by the grace of Allah and by the sacrifice of people like Abu Talib and Khadija alayhi salam and Imam Ali, the wisdom of the Prophet. But from a worldly perspective, it is one difficulty going to another and getting worse. And then after that, the Prophet tries to seek refuge in Ta'if and is rebuffed. And then he now migrates to Medina. So you would perhaps, as an impartial observer, say that I'm not really sure if I will put my trust in this messenger. But it depends what eyes you are looking at, what eyes you are looking with. If your bread and butter is politics, trust me, the migration will seem, or will have seemed to a contemporary observer who doesn't have the benefit of hindsight and knowing how the stock of Islam was going to shoot up better than Nvidia, it would have seemed like a losing proposition. If your analysis was based on economic relationships and trade, you would have said the same thing. The northern trade route and the southern trade route, both of them are very easily cut off. The people of Medina don't have that luxury of having a sanctuary or having that much prestige or having such numbers that they can fight off the combined might of Quraysh and their allied tribes and the Jewish tribes and clans of Hijaz and the environs. But there were people who placed their faith and their trust in our Prophet. They bought that stock at that moment. And their example is what we need to learn from. And if our calculations would have been different, then what we want to do is we want to see what was the way they made that decision. People do that all the time. When they have an investor who consistently beats the market, then they study their methodologies. They go and they seek a mentorship. They go and they try to learn from them. That's fine for your material success, but it is even more important for our spiritual success. What was the calculation of those who were the early adopters of Islam? And that is what brings us to Karbala. Because if you want to know what is the logic that may not have been very public and very well explained in the early days of Islam, but it was implicit within the heart of those early Muslims based on the purity of their intentions and the pristine nature of their souls, then it became very well defined and explained through the mission and the movement of the Prince of Martyrs, Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salatu wassalam. And that will be what leads us to the connection between Karbala and Imam Mahdi. That the foundation laid by our Prophet and that society established through the Hijrah, the heart and the beauty and the logic of that mission became most evident after Karbala and through Karbala. There was a physical journey, a hijrah of sorts, that Imam Hussein made. But now it was a hijrah from Medina. And this was perhaps the most difficult farewell for Imam Hussein. When he got a call from the Caliph's representative, the governor of Medina said to come to the governor's mansion. People said to Imam Hussein, "Why do you think he has called you at this unexpected hour?" Imam Hussein said that I think that the tyrant, the Taghiya Muawiyah has died, and they are calling me for my allegiance. Imam Hussein said to Walid that I am not going to give my allegiance in secret. The allegiance should be a public matter, and it should be done in front of the Muslims. And this was not an excuse of Imam Hussein, but it was a principle. This was the way the Prophet took bay'ah. This was the way that Imam Ali took bay'ah. This was the way that Imam Hasan took bay'ah at their assumption of the outward government. And Imam Hussein was giving a principle of Islam. But then when he left the governor's mansion, it is said in history that he went to the grave of his grandfather, the Messenger of Allah. He prayed a 2 rak'ah prayer. And then it is said that he laid down on the grave of the Prophet and he addressed his grandfather. He said that there is no more beloved place for me than this city, which is the city of my grandfather, the city in which every alley and every place in the masjid of the Prophet reminds Imam Hussein of those heavenly moments in his childhood when he was with the Prophet of Allah, when he was with Amir al-Mu'mineen Fatima Zahra, Imam Hassan. But he said that, "Oh grandfather, I am being compelled to leave your city because the government oppresses and the ummah does not support. They have abandoned me." And narrations say that Imam Hussein closed his eyes and in a vision he saw that Prophet Muhammad is coming down from the heavens, surrounded by angels on the right and on the left, in front of him and behind him. The Prophet comes down in this vision and he holds on to Imam Hussein and hugs him to his own chest and kisses him on the forehead between his 2 eyes. And he says that, "Oh my beloved Hussein, you are bidding farewell to me, but it is as if I am already in Karbala. It is as if I am a witness to you, with your head separated from your body and your entire body covered in your blood and the sand of Karbala. O Hussein, I will be a witness when you are martyred. Imam Hussein turned to his grandfather. Both of them had tears streaming down their faces. He said, "Oh, my grandfather, if you have honored me to come down into my presence, then take me with you. I have no desire to return to this world." And the Prophet is reported to have said that, "Oh, my beloved Hussein, there is a rank in paradise that only you will attain, and you will attain it through your martyrdom in Karbala. Oh, Hussein, know that I, your grandfather, your father Amir al-Mu'mineen, your mother Fatima Zahra, your brother Imam Hasan, your ancestors Hamza and Ja'far al-Tayyar, all of us are eagerly awaiting to be reunited with you. But oh Hussein, you must come to us through the gates of Karbala. You will offer that supreme sacrifice that will be a source of guidance and a source of inspiration for humanity until the day of judgment." Imam Hussein awoke from that vision. He came back to his home. He gathered the descendants of Abdul Muttalib and he told them what he has seen. It is said in history that there was never a grief that was as poignant and as so strongly expressed as the mourning in the descendants of Abdul Muttalib at that moment when Imam Hussein conveyed his dream. There were some whom Imam Hussein bid farewell to, and there were some who were going to join him on that journey. This was the departure from Medina. When you see that Ali al-Akbar, that Qasim, Aun and Muhammad, you see Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, and all of those brave young men who would be warriors coming with Imam Hussein, and you see that Sayyida Zainab is now mounting her camel in great honor, surrounded by the young members of her family. Go forward just a few weeks and see that what would become of this great caravan of the family and the loved ones of the Prophet. Maybe in Karbala, Zainab Salamullah alayha would remember that departure from Karbala when she sees that there is no one now to help her mount, and instead she is being taken as a captive to the court of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, and maybe she would have turned towards the battlefield of Karbala and bid her farewell to those lovely members of the household of the Prophet who offered their martyrdom, and she would have said that now see how Zainab alayhi salam is going to offer her sacrifice and perform her jihad in the way of Allah. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Oh Allah, accept this remembrance on our behalf. Oh Allah, on this eve of Muharram, count us among those who embark on the caravan of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, and allow us to be among those who are not deceived by the temptations and by the confusions of this world, and instead are able to see with insight and with clarity what is right, and to follow it from the very first moment that we have an opportunity. Oh Allah, keep alive our love for Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad and our attachment to their path and their mission. For as long as we live, and in our descendants, for as long as our line survives until the day of judgment. And O Allah, unite us with Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad on the day of judgment, and grant us their company for all eternity in the hereafter. Salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
Brothers and sisters, this concludes the program downstairs. Please proceed upstairs for matam to be done in the masjid upstairs. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.